Guten Morgen. Some of you may know that when I'm not sewing for YouTube, I'm designing and sewing dresses for clients, mainly for weddings. I started to upload on YouTube because I got a lot of questions about my techniques and also because I wanted to show how much time and effort goes into such a dress. But ever since I started, I got a lot more questions about the things behind the sewing, like how a typical work day for me looks like, or how I handle my projects, especially when I'm working on a few dresses at the same time. That's why I thought I could take you along on a typical work week. I've got a lot to do, so this may be a good opportunity to show you a variety of things I always have to do. We are working on a little to-do list every day and we'll see how far we get. There will be sewing, there will be a little bit of organizing, pattern drafting, and maybe also editing. Today is Monday morning and the plan is to start the week off with a little bit of pattern drafting. We have one pattern that we have to draft new, then there are two patterns that need to be adjusted after a fitting. And then there's one pattern where there only are a few final adjustments before it can be made into a dress. 3 of these patterns need sleeves drafted as well, so I'll be working on all of those patterns today and I'll take you along with me. So let's not waste any more time and get started. Before we get started, I have to clean up my workspace a little bit. I finished a commission last Friday and haven't been in the studio over the weekend, so I have to store everything away before starting something new. I like to have everything at its place, but especially towards the end of a project, the studio tends to turn a little messy, so cleaning the studio is step 1 today. Now that we've got an empty workspace, it's time to move on to the first task today, working on the pattern. All projects that already have a pattern but nothing more are stored on a hanger so that I directly see how many projects are currently in this stage. We will be focusing on 3 of those patterns for now. The first pattern I'm working on is a custom order that has to be ready in August. The last mock-up fitted well and it only needs some tiny tweaks, so now, while working on the pattern, I'll decide if I need another mock-up or if the changes are small enough that I can start with the actual dress now. I ended up adding only a tiny bit more room under the arm, so I'm confident that there isn't another mock-up necessary. The next pattern is a custom order of the Starry Night dress. This pattern is one of my favorites because of all the tiny pattern pieces that work together to create a beautiful design. We had 2 mock-ups before and you can clearly see some of the changes we made on the pattern. The overall fit is really good, we only need to add a bit more room around the waist. Since the straps and arms are fitted great on the previous mock-up, I could now draft the sleeve pattern to add it to the next mock-up. I traced the original sleeve pattern of the dress and changed the bottom to fit with the bodice pattern. The last step was to trace the cuff as well and change them to fit the client's measurements. I always add a little sheet with all the measurements as well as important infos like the deadline or additional wishes like pockets to the pattern, so I have those infos visible at all times. The next pattern I worked on was again a custom order, this time for the Moon and the Stars dress. Again I had to make only small changes to the bodice but could draft the sleeve pattern so that I can add them to the mock-up this time. I always prefer to fit the bodice first before adding the sleeves. This way it's a lot easier to see the fit around the armhole for me. With the next pattern adjusted, it was time to work on the final pattern. This time it's a new commission of a custom version of the mushroom sleeve dress. Whenever I start a new commission, I check if I have a similar pattern that's not too far off regarding the measurements or proportions. For this I could use the original pattern and add a few centimeters in length and width. I always trace the pattern first so that I don't destroy the original pattern and then draw in the changes. I prefer to leave the pattern as one sheet in the beginning, and once I know the pattern matches and only needs small alterations, I trace it onto smaller pieces. The new pattern gets its own transparent sheet and can be put to the existing ones. Guten Morgen. So today's Tuesday, and since we got all the patterns drafted yesterday, the goal for today is to cut out all the pattern pieces that we need to sew the 3 mock-ups we want to make. After that, I want to check on some fabrics because next week I have to start another dress, which is a commission as well, and I prefer to have all the materials before I start. So today I want to check how much I have left of the fabric or if I have to order anything. And after we cut out all the pattern pieces and checked on the fabric, I want to start with the first mock-up, depending on how much time we have left, because in the evening I also want to do some editing, start to edit this video, and I also have to finish the video that will be uploaded before this one. So I still have a lot of computer work to do as well. Yeah, I guess it's a lot to do, so let's not waste any more time and start. To work on the mock-ups, I first have to prepare the fabric. I'll iron it to make sure there are no wrinkles, but mostly so that it won't shrink when I work with it later. When the pattern is still one big sheet, I place it on top of a white paper under the fabric. This way it's easily visible through the fabric and I can trace it. I always trace one pattern piece, add the seam allowance and trace the next piece next to it. Once one strip on the bottom of the mock-up fabric is full, I cut it close to the lines and pull the fabric down to continue with the tracing. I always prefer to combine those steps for all the mock-ups I'm working on. I finish all the patterns first and then I'll draw all the pattern pieces onto fabric before cutting them out. I feel like this is the most productive way for me since I'm already in the headspace of each step and don't have to switch so much. Patterns that already are individual pieces are put on top of the fabric and then traced how it's usually done. I actually left this pattern for the end so that I can squeeze all the tiny pattern pieces between the ones I drew previously. And after drawing on all 3 patterns, it was then time to cut them out. I feel like an universal experience in sewing is the phenomenon when you put your scissors aside for 1 second and suddenly they are nowhere to be found. I swear I just had them and now sewing almost feels like a hidden object game. So, isn't it fitting that the sponsor of today's video is June's Journey? June's Journey is a free-to-download hidden objects game set in the 1920s following June Parker solving the mystery of her sister's murder. This makes the game not only a captivating murder mystery adventure, but also follows beautifully the aesthetic of the glamour of the 20s. My favorite parts are the beautiful scenes where you can find hidden objects and clues that are important to solve the murder of June's sister. The colorful scenes make it easy to dive into the world of the game and relax a bit. You can customize and remodel your mansion and island as well and get creative with how you want your base to look like. The game is available on Android, iOS mobile devices and with Facebook Games on PC. Please download from the link in the description or by scanning my QR code. Thanks to June's Journey for sponsoring this video, and now let's go find my scissors. Cutting out the pattern pieces works the same way as tracing them. I'll work on each piece after another until everything is cut out. I spend a lot of time on these steps, but this significantly reduces the work I have to do afterwards when sewing. So now all the pieces are cut out, the fabric scraps are thrown away, and it's time for the next step. I decided to check on the fabric now so that I could order missing fabrics afterward. I had already put all the pieces of the fabrics I had planned to use in the box for this project, so I could directly check how much I have of it without looking for the fabrics first. Since the fashion fabric is see-through, I need a fabric underneath it and a lining fabric. For both I knew I had fitting fabrics in my stash, but after measuring them I noticed that I need a bit more of the lining fabric, so I ordered it directly. Then I could focus on working on the mock-ups. It was still quite early, so I wanted to see how much I could get done. I like to start with the mock-up with the most pieces so that I can somehow reward myself when working on the last one and it's not so much to sew. First I lay out all the pattern pieces how they belong together. I think it's really fascinating how those flat pieces create a 3-dimensional shape when added together. Then I put all the pieces together in pairs to sew the first seam. Since all the pieces are cut precisely and I have the seam allowance drawn onto them, I can easily sew them together without pinning anything. This makes the sewing so fast and easy. I can just sew all the pairs in a long line together, cut and iron them, and then sew the next pair until I only have to add 2 big parts together in the end. I finished the first mock-up really fast and then continued to work on the other ones for the rest of the day. Guten Morgen. I know it looks like it's the middle of the winter, but I swear it's Wednesday morning in the middle of summer. It's very hot and I'm a bit annoyed about that because I don't like the heat. But let's get started with today. So I managed to finish all the mock-ups yesterday. I sewed the first one and I got it done so fast that I felt motivated to just do the other ones as well. Working on so many mock-ups, it's always exciting when they're done and I can really dive into a project and work on it from start to finish and work with beautiful fabrics and really have a finished dress in the end. I also really like to start a new day with a new project, so finishing all the mock-ups yesterday made me really happy. We only have to prepare them today so that we can send them out. But after that, it's time for the commission. First, we have to make a pattern for the lining and the facing. Then we will prepare the fabrics, the fashion fabric and the lining fabric. And then I want to cut out all the pieces. And since the dress isn't made from too many parts, I feel confident that we can get it done. I don't really know, but that's the plan. So let's see how much we can get done. Here are the finished mock-ups. They look a little silly with the long zippers, but I like to use the same kind of closure the dress will get later. And since oftentimes I don't need a mock-up of the skirt part, they look like this. First, I wrap them in some paper to give them a little protective layer and to fit them better into the packaging. Most of the mock-ups are sent out of the European Union, so I have to note a lot of things for the customs. First, every mock-up gets weighted with and without the packaging. I'll note this on the package as well as the name of the client so that my partner gets all the important information. He's the one who deals with all the custom stuff, which I'm really grateful for since this would take a lot of time for me. Then it was time to work on the next commission, and after picking the box for the project, I directly finalized the pattern for it. Every project that gets beyond the pattern phase has its own box to store all the materials and sometimes specific tools. This way I've got everything together and can manage more projects at once. This is how the dress will look later. The first thing I did was to work on the lining pattern. I drew on the original pattern where I wanted the lining to end and the facing to start. And then I traced both pattern pieces individually onto a new sheet of paper. When working on the facing, I made sure to make it a tiny bit, maybe just a millimeter smaller than the original pattern, where both of them will be sewn together. This ensures that the lining won't poke out in the end. Then those pieces are cut out. The pattern itself fitted perfectly, so I didn't need any changes, but I wanted to add some extra seams to fit the design. After that, I put all the pattern pieces away and moved on to the next step. I got the fabric, checked it for damages, ironed it, and then prepared it to cut out all the pieces. With a dress that is made from bigger skirt panels and very small top parts, I like to cut out the skirt panels first and then use the rest for the other parts. I used a pattern piece that had the circumference of half of the waist and cut out 3 skirt panels from it, so I would be able to pleat in the extra fabric later. This will make a hem circumference of something between 6 to 7 meters in the end. Then I get the rest of the fabric together and ironed it to get an overview which pattern pieces can go onto which fabric piece. When this was done, I ironed some interfacing onto the fabric and then traced all the pieces onto it. Again, I'm drawing all the pieces on at the seam allowance and then cut all of them out in the end. Those pieces now include all the bodice parts as well as the facing. And then I did basically the same with the lining fabric. This lining is actually one of my favorites to use because it fits very nice against the skin and it's easy to work with. It's called Venezia lining, and I know a lot of you are interested in where I get my fabric from, but both the lining and the black dupioni silk are from a local supplier here in the region who only sells to businesses, so I don't think it's really helpful for the most of you. The lining pieces are only the skirt, which is a half circle, and 7 parts for the top, so I got them all cut out quite fast, and with that I had prepared everything for the next day.
Good morning. So we have 2 days left of the week, which means it's Thursday. We are pretty good on schedule this week, I think, which makes me really happy. Yesterday I managed to cut out all the pieces like I planned to do, so today can be all about sewing. I'm really looking forward to today because I like the stage a lot where I got everything cut out and I can just zone out a bit and sew. I hope I can get the lining bodice and the outside bodice done today, so all the top parts sewn together. And then depending on how much time I have left, I definitely have to edit a bit, so some computer work. And then I'll see if I can already start maybe on the lining skirt because it's a bit simpler, but I don't think I'll get to that stage. So the plan is to sew the bodices and then to edit a bit. So that's the plan for today, and I'm really excited and I'm looking forward to the sewing. So let's go.
The first thing I did was to prepare everything for the sewing. I put all the fabric rests into the project box and then prepared the threads. I prefer to prepare all the bobbins I need for a project beforehand so that I don't have to stop mid-sewing because I ran out of thread. So now we have all the threads and the bobbins prepared, so we can start to sew. Then I laid out all the lining pieces like I did with the mock-ups in the beginning of the week. I tend to start with the lining because I feel like it's a great way to get into the project without the pressure to directly make the outside look perfect. Most of the time it's a similar pattern like the outside with a few less seams maybe, so it's great to get familiar with the pattern since the last mock-up I made for this project was most likely a month ago. After sewing the parts that have a more dramatic curve, I make sure to clip the seams properly so that I can iron it as smooth as possible. This always takes a bit more time, but neatly pressed seams are always worth the extra effort. Then I added the facing to the lining, taking extra care when working on the corners to get them sharp and straight. After that, I added my label in the center front. I don't really have a set space where I add it every time and rather just see where on this pattern I like it most. The finished lining top is then put on a hanger. When I got something for a project done and have to move on to another part, the finished part is always going back into the box or put on a hanger so that my space is free for the next part and I don't risk to damage or stain the finished part in any way. Then I continued with the outside top. Now that I worked on the lining with a similar pattern, especially at the top part of the bodice, I knew which parts I needed to pay extra attention to, and so I could sew it quite easily. It took a bit longer because it was made from a few more pattern pieces, but working with the dupioni silk is always really satisfying because it's so nice to sew. I decided to iron all the seam allowances down to get some kind of layered effect on the bodice. added the last pieces and could then hang it next to the lining top. So the week is almost over. It's Friday, which means we have one day left, and today is all about the skirts. I'm pretty happy how fast I make progress on this dress. It's not always like this, that the fabric is nice to work with and the pattern is easy to sew, and if everything comes together, I'm really happy about this, and I just enjoy the calm sewing and that I can relax a bit while working. We managed to finish both tops yesterday, so today I first want to sew the lining skirt and add it to the bodice, and then work on the outside skirt. The outside skirt will get pockets into the side seams, so we have to prepare them first. Then it will get an invisible zipper in the back, so we'll be doing that. And after that, the top will be pleated of the skirt. So those are all the things I want to get done today. And if I still have time, I want to add the skirt to the bodice. But since yesterday got pretty long with the editing, I think I want to make a shorter day today and just get the things from the to-do list done and then finish to edit the video later. And I'll let you know how this works out. Since the lining skirt was now hanging for almost 2 days, the fabric relaxed a lot and I could cut the right length all around. For this, I folded the skirt and used the selvage edge as a guide for the length and cut the rest off. I always think it's fascinating how much fabric changes over time or in contact with heat or steam. And it's important to keep that in mind so that everything has the right shape in the end and all pieces fit together. After marking the length of the zipper, I closed the center back of the skirt, making sure to use a wider stitch at the top and a smaller from where the zipper ends down to the hem. After ironing the seam open, I could then work on the hem of the lining skirt. Whenever the pattern and shape allows it, I like to get this step done before adding the skirt into the dress, because it's so much easier to put under the sewing machine when it's only this one piece. With pattern pieces that are circles and half circles, I always fold the bottom in, sew it in place, and after ironing, fold it in once more. This makes the hem very smooth even though it's curved. Then I removed the thread from the top of the center back to make it easier for me to sew it to the lining top. I pinned everything in place and could then add both pieces together. And after ironing it flat, I could put it on its hanger again to work on the outside of the skirt of the dress. First I prepared the pockets. Adding them into seams is very easy and I don't really need an extra pattern for it. To make sure the pockets are big enough, I simply lay my hand onto the fabric and then draw around it. The opening should be big enough so that the hand can slide in easily, and there should be enough room so that you could put a phone in it, for example. This piece is then cut out and traced once more onto the silk as well as onto the lining fabric. I made a little facing for those pieces so that the lining wouldn't be visible from the outside and secured it by sewing it onto the pieces. Then I could add the 4 pocket pieces onto the sides of the front and back of the skirt, making sure to add the lining pieces to the front piece and the silks to the back. For this, I measured 20 centimeters down from the top, secured both pieces together with pins and then sewed them. To make sure nothing moves later, I sewed over it again right next to the seam. Then everything was prepared to sew the sides together, but I decided to sew the center back first, since I wanted to add the invisible zipper, and this is a lot easier with less fabric attached to it. So I closed the center back next, making sure to use a wider stitch at the top, similar to how the lining skirt was closed before. Then I added the zipper to both the seam allowances. After that I had to remove the thread and could secure the zipper as close to the seam as possible. And then it was time to close the side seams with the pockets. I'm really happy that I'm now at a stage where things like sewing in an invisible zipper works on the first try. I've always been a fast sewer, but only sewing for almost every day of the last 2 years now brought me the routine and also some kind of trust in my abilities that I can make such a quick progress on a dress like this. Whenever I'm working on a dress, it's not only the time it takes to actually sew it from start to finish, but also the time spent to learn all the techniques and making mistakes so that now everything works smoothly. Closing a skirt with an invisible zipper and adding pockets works great now, but it sure didn't when I tried it for the first time.
Guten Abend. So the last thing I did was to close the side seams and finishing the pockets. Initially I had planned to gather the top as well, but I noticed that I'm getting unconcentrated because I've been sewing for quite a while and it's also very hot in here, and I've learned my lesson before that I have to stop at that stage because the sewing isn't getting better and I'm getting more frustrated, and I think everyone can relate to that. So I decided to stop with the sewing, but I'm not too sad about it because we really got a lot done this week, which I wasn't too sure about because usually when I'm filming the sewing takes maybe twice as long, so I'm really happy what we got done. So next time I'm working on the dress I can finish the skirt, add it to the bodice, and then there isn't too much to do left. So I'm really happy about what I got done this week. Also in the evenings I was editing a bit and could also make progress on that.
So let's recap. We first worked on 4 patterns, started one new, adjusted 2 others, and finished another one. We kept track on our fabric stash and ordered new fabric. Then we traced a ton of pattern pieces, cut out all of those and sewed the 3 mock-ups. We packed the mock-ups, made a lining pattern and cut out all the pattern pieces from the lining and silk fabric. We sewed the silk top, finished the lining including the top and the skirt, and then prepared the skirt adding pockets and the zipper. Additionally, we edited the footage in the evenings.
I hope you liked today's video because even though this time it really was a lot about sewing, I think it shows quite well how I work and how I organize my week and how I plan my week. So if you liked today's video, please leave a comment to let me know so that I can maybe do another video like this where there's maybe a photo shoot of a finished dress, or I have to design a new commission, or something completely different that will come up then. Thanks again to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video, and please remember to download the game from my link. Thank you for watching today's video and I hope you really enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I hope to see you next time.